Hey everyone, Mark and Steve here.
Before we get started today, we want to let you know about Dare to Connect, our new online interactive video platform.
For less than the cost of a therapy session, you and your spouse get live access to both of us 3 times a week.
Each 30-minute live group support session provides interactive mentoring and healing for addicts, spouses, and couples.
If you're loving our podcast and our unique style of bringing you recovery, you're going to love Dare to Connect.
To learn more, go to daretoconnectnow.com. We're looking forward to seeing and working with you. Hey everybody, I'm Steve Moore.
And I'm Mark Castleman.
We know the pain and heartbreak of porn and sex addiction.
And we know the triumph of breaking completely free.
Every day, we help our clients find hope and healing.
Join us in the fight to take back your life, your marriage, and be stronger than ever.
This is the PBSE Squared podcast.
Hey everyone, Mark and Steve on the PBSE podcast. You'll notice from our title, my addict partner of 33 years is out of control and I don't know where to start. We had a dear PBSE listener write in, and man, oh man, did our hearts go out to this gal, because here's what she describes that we're going to address today. I am a wife of 33 years in betrayal trauma after finding my husband on multiple occasions had on and off affairs over 8 years with the same person, and now found out he's using drugs. He's got multiple addictions. I would like to set boundaries, but I'm not part of his addictions, and he doesn't turn to me. We've had no sexual relationship in 2 years. Can you talk about escalation of addiction? He started with weed, then alcohol, then porn, then affairs, and now meth. What boundaries can I set?
Yeah.
Steve, you and I looked at that, and part of us did a nervous laugh. Then the other part of us was just like, oh my gosh, this poor woman. Where do we even begin? What she wrote, that is huge. It's big. It's like, oh, wow. And so we're going to try.
Yeah, we are. We're definitely going to tackle this. We will tell you right out the gate that answering some of these questions is just going to be a scratch the surface today. These podcasts are short, as you guys know, who've listened before. And so the information will be good, but it is going to be a little bit shorter. We just do not have the time to tackle this in detail. However, as a quick note, we would love to tackle and do tackle. In fact, we tackled a very similar topic just recently like this on our Dare to Connect program for addict spouses and couples. Would love to have you guys join us. We are doing a 2-week trial on that right now. You can find out more about that at daretoconnectnow.com. We'd love to have you jump on over there and flesh out things like this on our interactive show 3 times a week. But in any rate, getting into this, you're right, Mark, what you said. I mean, just the way that the language is worded with this submission, it really was kind of you have to chuckle a little bit because it is really hard to hear. It's so hard. It's, you got to laugh in order not to cry.
And it's so big. You're just like, whoa. I mean, in what she said, there's like 10 major issues. I mean,
absolutely.
What in the world is this gal going through?
For sure. So we're going to jump through this as quick as we can, like I said, and try to cover both of the main points that she brought up and get her as a listener. And for all those of you who may be listening in a similar place where you find yourself of having really lost your voice in your relationship, or maybe you're in a place where you don't even know where to start when it comes to finding that again. Because that's really what this is for. This is a session for those who really have struggled with those things. So we're going to talk. Let's start off, and we'll answer the first question. Let's talk briefly about escalation of addiction.
Yeah.
So the research, and both intrinsically and in the actual published literature about this, is clear. Mark and I have been doing this for a long time. We've got easily 40 years of experience of professional work with people and book writing and all sorts of things on the topic of addiction. We've both worked in chemical as well as sexual addiction, and we've both run treatment programs in both of those areas. And one thing that we do know about addiction, we'll pull a quote from 12-Step. It's a very profound quote. Addiction is always progressively more addictive and destructive.
Mm-hmm.
And so that means 2 things. One, much like a cancer, if left unchallenged, it will grow. In virtually every case. I guess there could always be that outlier where somebody kind of just randomly stops with an addiction. But when you really get into the psychology of how addiction is oftentimes a coping mechanism for a variety of different maladies, when it's about how it's an escape from different things and pain points and past trauma and all the things that addiction oftentimes is covering up, those things do not go away on their own. And therefore the addiction does not usually do that in hardly any case ever. And along with that, there's that destructive piece, right? So that means that usually over time, the consequences increase. That includes progressive, taking of risks, and also more collateral damage, meaning that more people are often impacted. And you can even see that in the list of addictions that are mentioned here, right? Weed, then alcohol, both of those are legal in many places, and obviously carry a large potential for consequences. But then you start talking about pornography and then full-on affairs, and methamphetamine on any level with anyone will always destroy one's life quicker than just about any other chemical substance on the planet. So you look at these different, you can see the escalation that she talks about in the question, right? It started off with these legal or I guess you could say, quote unquote, less innocuous issues, but then they become progressively addictive, and more people, right, get pulled in. More people are impacted, more people are affected. And she does mention really quick, can you talk about how these kind of interact? And so it is important for everybody knowing that it is very common when it comes to the brain science of addiction, for people to do two things, either to switch addictions. So addiction will jump from one thing to another. And that is very common. When we work with porn addicts, for example, which we do a lot of obviously on our podcast. When I do that in my clinic a lot, especially with younger men, the more we curb the pornography until they learn better coping skills, or in the absence of learning better coping skills, I should say, guess what happens with their video game playing?
Yep.
It like skyrockets through.
Yep. The video game playing skyrockets. I have other clients who maybe aren't into gaming. They're older.
Mm-hmm.
You'll see them jump. They'll get the porn and the sexual outlets under control, and their eating goes out right off the charts.
Totally. Mm-hmm. Right. And so that's a jumping of addiction. We call that cross addiction. Okay. So that's where addiction will jump from one thing to another. It's also very common for addictions to happen in tandem with one another, and oftentimes to interplay with one another. So for example, there are a lot of addictions that we wouldn't call them gateway drugs, but they do oftentimes facilitate other forms of acting out. So alcohol or other substances oftentimes is paired with sexually compulsive behavior. Right. The one kind of provides the gateway and the lowering of inhibitions to engage in the other progressively destructive stuff.
And I've had lots of clients over the years who have used different kinds of drugs to enhance the sexual experience.
Absolutely.
So
you're absolutely right.
Mm-hmm.
Totally. So there's lots of ways in which those can happen. So that's a whole other talk for another day, but just getting that out there for our subscriber that reached out to us. You do need to know that those are very much a thing. And that again, these things won't self-resolve.
Yeah. And where my heart was really touched is when she described all that. And she said, I'd like to set boundaries, but I'm not part of his addictions and he doesn't turn to me. Mm-hmm. And that really hit me pretty hard, because the way I was raised in a pretty abusive and traumatic environment, I was surrounded by people who were addicts, people who had significant mental illness, people who were aggressive, right? What I would kind of call sick people. And they were very dominant. And I learned very early on that if I was going to survive with those kinds of people surrounding me, I could not have a voice. I needed to learn to get along, to go along. I needed to learn how to be quiet and step on eggshells and do everything I could with my own little tactics to survive. And here was the thing. The crazy part about that is through all of those years of doing that and developing that personality and coping style, I actually was applauded for it many times, right? Mark, you're so easy to get along with. Mark, you're so chill. Mark, you're so quiet and reserved. Or even, Mark, you're so Christian, right? Oh my gosh, you're like so Jesus, Mark.
Yes.
And so I had no idea and no models for how to have a voice, for how to stand up for myself.
Yeah.
Right. I didn't know how to do it. In fact, I was often encouraged to do just the opposite. Mm-hmm. And to be passive and to be a doormat and to be, we might even say, people's whipping boy. And here's the even more crazy part is that I was even taught that those were desirable attributes, right? The way I was being, the way I was sacrificing myself and my voice to get along with all these crazy people. And so I didn't know anything else. And here's the other part. The people that told me that was so loving were absolutely dead wrong. That's not how you truly, the way that I wish someone would have taught me about living with all those addicted, mentally ill, dominant, aggressive people was the most loving thing would have been to have stood up to them and confronted them and challenged them so that there was at least a glimmer of hope that they could change. But all I did was learn how to go along. So did they ever change? Nope. Yeah. And all that happened is they escalated and their addictions and mental illness became worse. And I became more silent and more trampled on. Yeah. And how did I cope with all that? I went and found my own addiction outlets in order to cope with all of that crap that was put on me.
I appreciate Mark sharing that and being vulnerable about that. I mean, it's really, obviously we're reading a lot into this. We are reading a good bit into this submission from this listener because there's so much backstory that's missing, but just kind of examining the language. The sad truth is, everybody, that, and Mark and I can attest to this. I won't speak for Mark, but I myself, I remember the first time in therapy when I was doing my own work, and we were early on, my wife and I, in the recovery period, and my therapist kind of lowered the boom with me. It was one of those sessions I went in and I could tell my wife and I, they'd met before, and it was like something different is happening today. And luckily I really trusted him by that point, which is good, but he pulled out a chart that walked me through the multiple steps of the emotional abuse cycle. And I remember staring at that, and my first response was your typical what you might expect, which was totally a pride / shame, but externally pride response, where I told him he didn't know what he was talking about, and I'm a therapist too, and blah, 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 blah.
So he was pointing out to you a chart that showed how you had been emotionally abusive to your wife?
Yes. Yes. As part of this whole addiction cycle. And that's kind of where I'm going with this, is the reality is I think, and I can only assume what's happened especially when you bring in the chemical addiction and the loss of inhibition that comes with that. It's probably an understatement to say that this partner who's writing in has endured at least a significant amount of emotional abuse, if not even other forms.
Yes.
And because, again, we addicts, we do not get to a point in our world where we get to be adults where we've perpetuated this behavior for years and years and years without perpetuating that on people oftentimes that are closest to us.
Yes.
And you can really just hear the pain in her voice of very much, Mark, what you described, of just this, I've got to just somehow keep this together. And that is especially true. We see that with too many spouses, sadly, when kids are involved or other factors or mitigating factors are present, where
they don't have the financial wherewithal to be independent. They're kind of stuck and trapped. Yes,
absolutely. And so again, heart really goes out there. And so we want to, as we wrap up today, because this last question that she asked, what boundaries can I set? That is that's like a week-long retreat.
Like a 10-part series, right?
There is no way we could ever address all of those. What we would say to this listeners, we have done many podcasts on our boundaries, on the concept of boundaries. Please do go back and listen to some of those. The titles are all there. This is like our 160th episode or something. So there's a good amount of them.
If you want to search podcast, the easiest way, go into our website, pbsepodcast.com. Go to the blog where all of our podcasts are in that blog, and then just do a search.
Yes, that's right.
Search on boundaries.
Absolutely. Mark actually goes in there and uploads that information every week. He's really good to do that. So that would actually be a great place to start. But also, we would strongly recommend looking at some therapy options as well to do that. But we do want to take a couple minutes and just talk about some of the underlying concepts of why boundaries are going to not just be important for this listener going forward, but frankly, they're a requirement.
And I'll say something really quick about that as we enter the realm of boundaries. I had no idea how to set boundaries. I was told I wasn't allowed to. You don't have the right? There's all these other people around you who have these severe, deep, incredible needs. They come first and you don't matter. That's the message I got. So how am I going to set boundaries with that kind of a hierarchy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the first things I had to do is I had to seek out a support system that was outside of that nucleus that I was trapped in. I had to go find people who had been where I was and learned how to set boundaries, learned how to gain a voice, stand up for themselves, speak their truth. I had to go find people who could teach me that because I didn't know how. In fact, I was petrified to do it. So this is where we talk about things like Essanon, right? This gal, I would so encourage her to get involved with a 12-step group, get involved with a support group. Go be with women who have faced what you're facing, and they can teach you how to do this. Yes. Right? They can put their arms around you and guide you through the process.
Well, and just that commonality that you're going to find, right? I mean, it's very common for victims of emotional abuse or people who are trapped in relationships like this. You get so you become so myopic, right? Mm-hmm. We and what I mean by that is we only know what we know, and we're only involved in the relationship that we're in, right? And it's very easy for a spouse to kind of feel trapped, like nobody's going to get this, nobody's going to understand.
Or even to be convinced that it's just normal.
Yes, absolutely.
Is this kind of normal?
Yeah, this must be what happens in every relationship, right? I mean, it's all be like this.
Right.
And so it makes total sense. But yeah, we want to just cover some quick baselines as we wrap up here of things that everyone can expect in a relationship. And you don't hear us say that a lot. We're not guys that usually lay down gauntlets of like always or never. That's, because most of life happens in the gray, especially in the recovery world. But these are some absolutes. Okay.
Yep. Everyone in a partnership or marriage relationship is entitled to these things.
Absolutely. And number one, okay, every in a relationship, everyone, both partners equally, they have the right and deserve to be chosen and fought for by their respective partner.
Yes.
Hands down. I don't care what kind of marriage you have. I don't care what culture you come from. This transcends cultural identity, and it goes back to basic humanity and basic fundamental human connection, right? At the end of the day, if I am going to be with somebody and share my intimate self with them emotionally, physically, right, then that it is a baseline expectation that person is also equally choosing me in return.
Yes.
And that is the foundation of any relationship. And that doesn't mean just what does that mean, right? It means a couple of things. It means being pursued romantically and otherwise, looked out for, right? My safety will be that person's one of their top priorities, right? I will always be able to be empathized with. In my primary relationship, I will always at least be heard out for what I am feeling and thinking. It may not be agreed with, but but my partner will sincerely listen to me. They will give pause. They will try to connect with my feelings, be it painful or not, right? They will do all of those things.
Again, and as you describe that, she says 33 years of this marriage, and we don't know the details, but I can only imagine after 33 years, it can just sort of become comfortable, familiar. She's kind of like an old piece of furniture in the house. I'm too tired to kind of take it to the dump or the charity sale. Well, I'll just keep it here, but it's familiar, it's comfortable, it's ordinary. And it can be so easy to fall into that trap after 33 years. That's not what you'll notice in our words. It's exactly the opposite. Is she being pursued? Is she being looked out for? Is she being made to feel safe? Is she empathized with? Right? Is this guy literally leading out to do these things for her? She is entitled to that.
Yes. Everybody's entitled to that.
Everyone.
Right? I mean, that's again, we're talking about just the fundamental things. And I know that this may sound obvious to many listeners, but again, for those of you who've been in relationships for a long time where there's been a lot of either emotional trauma or emotional manipulation, it's shocking how easily we can lose sight of some of these things. So this is important for everybody to hear. But if we kind of go back to this, right? So we've covered the chosen piece. We kind of covered this a little bit, but this equal voice component is absolutely critical. And I know that this will challenge some cultures, et cetera, et cetera. A marriage, in my view, hands down, I don't care where you hail from, everybody, if it's to be healthy, everyone has to have an equal voice. No one calls all the shots.
Right.
That is not how a relationship functions. That's not a relationship. It is a dictatorship. This whole idea of a dominant and submissive partner is utter nonsense. And I think any research-based or even just a humanity-based approach would argue that same thing.
Well, and it's so easy for that to get out of balance when you have one partner who, quote, has all of the severe problems.
You're absolutely right.
Well, I have the problems and the
Absolutely right.
addictions and the mental illness and the issues and all this stuff. And so all the attention goes on me. All the priorities are me.
Yes.
And it's very difficult to have an equal voice when that is the case.
Well, and unfortunately, that gets perpetuated by our culture as well, because in an addiction situation, who always gets all the help?
The addict.
It's always the addict.
Mm-hmm.
They're the one that gets rallied around. They're the one that all the programs are out there for. They're the one that, gets the assistance from X, Y, or Z, from the government, for example. Government programs are much more focused on the addict. And it's obviously, it's not that we don't connect with those struggling with addiction. Mark and I do this every day for a living. Nobody connects probably better than we do as to addicts in recovery. Nevertheless, the only bigger tragedy than what happens with addicts is with the people involved in their lives who are equally affected, but had no say in this in the first place.
Right.
Had no doing or hand in any of this, but are just along for the horrible, hellish ride. And so,
and this equal voice comes down to the place where, this does this woman's spouse give equal voice to her hopes, her wants, her dreams, her needs? Does she get to express those? Does she get to say, here's what I need from you in our relationship. This is what I want to look forward to. This is what I dream of. How much space is she given for those things?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yep. In that equal pursuit of these positive things, right? Having a voice in the direction and the trajectory of one's life, of the coupleship, is critical. And when it comes to these setting of boundaries, again, we're not going to get into the specifics of those today because we can't for sake of time, but boundaries should be reflective of that, right? If for example, addiction is standing in the way of accomplishing those dreams, which it probably almost always does,
Mm-hmm.
a spouse has every right and the obligation to say, you are holding us back. And it's okay to have struggles. It's not okay to have struggles and not do something about it.
Right.
That is not okay.
Right.
We all have weaknesses. We all get pulled into things. All those things happen, but continuing on as we are is unacceptable. And we need to either do that different, or this marriage isn't going to last. Right. I think then for most people, that is simply honoring reality. But,
yes.
A healthy coupleship, they're going to pursue that happiness, and those goes equally for both people. A spouse and kind of, the last point of kind of these relationship rights, if you will, that we're talking about, is they need to be able to have an equal voice in expressing those concerns. And again, having those heard out and listened to, right? Even if your partner, for all those addicts listening, every partner, addict, spouse, whatever, knows what it's like to sit down with their partner and have their partner vocalize something that on the surface sounds nuts, right? It's like, I don't even reference with what you're saying. Like, this is just a completely foreign concept, or I'm not seeing it from your perspective, or whatever the case is. But a healthy coupleship will be one where even if my brain instantly tells me this makes absolutely no sense, if I am a connected partner who is doing my due diligence at a baseline level with my partner, I am going to do two things. I'm going to say, where does this thinking come from for this person? What's that about? Right. I'm going to walk in their shoes. I'm going to empathize. And the second piece is going to be, considering what it needs they're expressing. Is this something, however weird or out there it may be, would this be compatible with our relationship? And is there a way for me to realistically, authentically accommodate that?
Yeah. Yeah. Right? What can I do? What can I do about what's being expressed? Exactly. And the last point as we close up, and this was really tough for me because of the environment that I was raised in. To truly love another, we must love and connect with ourselves first.
Yes.
And I did not know how to do that because all of me was sacrificed for the needs of all those around me, right? Because they were so intense in their addiction and mental illness and aggressiveness and all the stuff. All the attention was over there. So I didn't matter. I didn't even know how to relate to myself. So part of this gal, one of the things that's really important for her is to learn to connect with yourself first. What are your needs? What are your desires? right? What about your well-being and your safety and your happiness? You need to make that is the number one priority. Your well-being first, and then your partners. And the other part of that then, and again, you're going to have to be mentored and find support from people who can teach you how to look out for yourself, how to stick up for yourself, how to love and take care of yourself, because you've been in this so long, you may not know how. You've sacrificed it for so many decades that you've lost sight of what it even means to love and take care of yourself.
Yes, absolutely. Nope, you're dead on right. So anyway, there's so much more we could say about this, but we really, our heart, I was just, as we're sitting here talking about this, we were getting ready to record this today. I thought back to, when Mark and I wrote our first book, The Pornography Paradox. In the front, we dedicated it to two things: to our own wives, who we put through hell, and to every spouse that is, looking for help and healing with this stuff.
Yes.
There's just, we really do love and care about you spouses and honor your desire to try to work on hard relationships when things seem hopeless, when they seem difficult, when it seems like the only other option is to end things. And sometimes it gets to that point, and that's understandable. But for everyone who tries to do this another day when it's still authentic to do so, we just applaud what you're doing.
Well, and this gal, after 33 years, she's still stuck around with everything she describes. She's a hero. That's
like a mental health Purple Heart right there.
She's an angel. She's like miraculous.
Yeah.
I mean, wow. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. Anyway, guys, thanks so much. Please do keep the submissions coming in. As Mark indicated, we'd love to get questions that you'd like answered on the podcast. We'd love to have you join us at Dare to Connect. Again, that can be info on that is at daretoconnectnow.com. And submissions for future podcasts, questions you'd like answered can be submitted at our contact form at pbsepodcast.com. That's it, guys. Have a great week.
All right. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye. Everything expressed on the PBSE podcast are the opinions of the hosts and the participants and is for informational and educational purposes only. This podcast should not be considered mental health therapy or as a substitute thereof. It is strongly recommended that you seek out the clinical guidance of an individual qualified mental health professional. If you're experiencing thoughts of suicide, self-harm, or a desire to harm others, please dial 911 or go to your nearest emergency room.